Hello and welcome. You have found the Fury Podcast, and my name is Zachary Yuki. And July is here with us. What to talk about? I've been toying with the idea of writing a book, and if I was to ever write a book, I think I will title it The Growth Obligation. You know, the fact being that we've exhausted the low hanging fruits, and we're gonna have to look for new gardens, new opportunities, new ways of doing things, rather than just trekking on the predefined traditional path. And perhaps what I want to talk about today is akin to just that, the higher education bubble. I've made it a point to screenshot every time there's a piece written on what is happening with higher education, all these jobless youth, the mere fact that perhaps even there is reduced capitation into these public institutions by the government itself. And even in the previous, to reference a previous conversation that I had, from the president saying that it's good to think about the return on investment, the mere fact that there's a lot of billions of taxpayers' money that is dedicated towards education, but to what end? After the child, has acquired education as it is set up right now, does it pay off? And if it doesn't, so what is the point of making an investment with that much money to arrive where you have a useless degree and now you have to think of becoming a TikToker? Not that I have anything about it, I myself have an account. But anyway, what is really the problem here? The higher education bubble, a bubble that is bursting. For sure, there is evidence enough that it is bursting, just like we had with the banking industry. I think in 2007, eventually, I think the bankers did socialize the losses, and with the gains, it was all about them. I want to start off by giving a childhood experience. I grew up Catholic, back in the village. Kiagai, Kirinyaga County. Shout out. Yeah, Kiagai, Kirinyaga County. Ria ndothe me Kiagai. Muhana atia. Ria kuo wega. Aigurora mutora atia. Anyway, I grew up Catholic, and I grew up Catholic, and the whole 9 years, I was an altar boy, and one of my fondest moments was, when the bishop would visit, and then perhaps you might be given the role of being the candle bearer. It was just there was some performance to it that was rather exciting, at that age. But one of the things you have to realize about the Catholic Church, is that it is not self-sustainable, meaning that the people who are onboarded don't have kids. The fathers or those who are called into that profession, they don't have kids, and what that means is there's no continuity. But the brilliance, of the church is that it relies now on the general population to supply them with, so to speak, new recruits or new people who are called into the profession. And in that sense, you make sure that, the wheel keeps turning, it just doesn't die off. And I think, in a sense, that is what we, or the brilliance, perhaps, of the genius of us as a human species, that we have based our institutions on this idea of progress, the growth obligation. Mere fact that you are a graduate at some point, perhaps you can go back to school and study your masters, and after that you might decide to even become a professor, right? It's the idea of progress. You're never at one place. You keep going to a definite end, and that is really the idea of progress, and that, I guess, it's even echoed in Christianity. If you think about the end of a Christian who lives as Christ would have them do, is that this idea of life after death. That there's still something in the distant future better than whatever is it that you're having now, the idea of progress. But you actually think about now in the sense of the idea of progress with just how we've set up this institution, like, say, the higher education. Here you have social institutions. I think he means well. And then you have all these brilliant people who are brought on boards and they compete. They specialize on the same fields with the idea that they're going to go out there and fit into certain job groups, so to speak, certain fields, and they are going to do well and serve their community in one way or another. But here is where the problem lies. And I guess is a problem that was pointed out by Jean Girard in his numeric theory explanation. You know, the fact that you do not know what you want until your neighbor shows up. Other people mirror our desires for us. So you have to think that in the case of a university, a college, so to speak, is that you're all competing for the same thing, you're all copying. And that eventually leads to what he called as the memeric conflict. It has to be a conflict of some sort. You cannot all be absorbed, perhaps by the market after you're done. And even when you are, absorbed, you still have to keep on competing to emerge the best in the same narrow field that you've all chosen. But what happens when you keep exhausting these low-hanging fruits, the well-defined fields that we have already established and said that these are what are good for community, perhaps, they're serving certain needs or not. What happens when you keep exhausting this and you're still basing the decision of the idea of progress in that, there is a heaven, that awaits for you if you're to go through this? That is the message of the gatekeepers. Memory conflict. It is competition through and through. So, like, pastorally two end up competing for the same field, and they end up exhausting all the grass that is in the area. It exactly perhaps what has happened with the higher education and why perhaps we have to offer a new gospel. There's a weird thing about, like dropping up or success, in a sense that it almost feels like anyone who like is passionate enough, like drop out of college again. This is a very risky case to make, and end up pursuing their own path. In a sense, they're almost guaranteed, success, in a sense, different from their peers. Is that if you can find a way of escaping the memory conflict and trying to figure out how to find new markets, there's almost a guarantee, in a sense. Again, there's not a guarantee, and again, it's not fair to make the case that everyone who does so, they are guaranteed of it. But you get my point. If you have 50 students in a class and they have all studied, Bachelor of Commerce, I mean, who is to say after the 50 have gone out in the real world, what happens? They have finite amount of positions that they can go into. And even if, after they've gone into those fields, all they end up doing is competing now for the same positions. Now, Peter Thiel had a very interesting take on this. He's tend to claim that, one of the people who have influenced him the most is Jean Girard. And that is just how he has gone to set up his own companies. He will avoid competition, a memeric, conflict at all costs. An idea how he has done that is to make sure that everyone who is on board in a company, they just handle just one aspect of that. And that is what they are answerable to. And that minimizes the conflict in between people for the same positions, which are finite. But the people, they just keep showing up. There are more people than there are opportunities, so to speak. Yeah. And I think, in a sense, that is what has happened with the education. Perhaps in the 90s, 70s, 80s, early 2000s, perhaps those were good times. Only few educated people, perhaps, in the village, and they were all taken up by the market. But we've gotten to a point where majority of people are actually, well educated, but they no longer can be taken up by the market. The low-hanging fruits have all been exhausted, and the only way out is a new market. But that is a new kind of gospel. And most people, especially, younger people, they kind of realizing this, very early, that whatever it is that you studied in school is not a badge that you have to wear all your life. can even move fields and take up something new. And all this in an effort to escape the memory conflict, competition. And perhaps it is something that I personally have come to appreciate, having gone through the system myself, education, so to speak, studying and all the way you get to college. And then here you are in the job market, hunting for the same number of jobs. Anyway, you need to think, my background is in construction. Ideally, what happens is that, I and many others end up just deciding to start a construction company. We end up becoming contractors. And just like it is, with college, when you're competing for, to excel and just do well, you go out there and you form the same kind of companies and you end up, just competing for the same number of clients. You know, it's memory conflict, it's competition through and through until you die. And that, I think, to a large extent, is what the higher education bubble is about. Here we took all the learners, squeeze them into a finite amount of, defined fields, and we release them into the market, only to realize that you haven't created enough opportunity for all of them. And so, in a sense, what does that mean? 25 years is down the drain, or what? You should have thought of otherwise when you were still in college, or what? I mean, these are just new conversations. Not new conversation, but just new takes. And who is to say, what you should do about this sort of thing? But one of the things that is very clear is that, it almost feels like the higher education is dead. You don't even necessarily even have to go to college. Now, that is a very risky thing against to tell to someone who don't have, if college is the best bet, but it is in line with memory conflicts. And memory conflict can only lead to one thing: a scapegoat. There has to be a sacrifice of some sort. Now, sacrifice in this case can be in terms of the millions and millions of people who end up just being jobless after they've gone through these institutions or through the gatekeepers. It's a spiraling problem. And the only way out as an individual is to escape it. And escaping it means you have to forge forward, or you have to identify a new path and run with it and keep your faith up, because that is new territory. But what would you rather? Become the scapegoat or the sacrifice? The system has taken you up and chewed you up, or the odd one out? I don't know. It's risk everywhere. But one thing is for sure: with higher education, there is competition through and through. And it would appear, to a large extent, you've really exhausted the low hanging fruit. And it's time to identify new markets, carve yourself a new path. That is it for today. Enjoy the rest of your day, people. Ciao.